The Phalanx was one of the most famous and influential military formations of the ancient world, representing discipline, unity, and collective battlefield strength. Rather than being a specific military unit like the Roman legion, the Phalanx was a tactical formation in which heavily armed infantry stood shoulder to shoulder in tightly packed ranks, creating a solid wall of shields and projecting spears toward the enemy. Its purpose was simple but highly effective: to concentrate force, protect individual soldiers through collective defense, and overwhelm opponents through coordinated pressure. Although the Phalanx is most closely associated with ancient Greece, similar formations appeared much earlier in history, and the concept of massed infantry fighting as a unified bloc remained influential for centuries. The earliest known examples of phalanx-like formations can be traced back thousands of years before classical Greece. One of the oldest visual representations appears on the Sumerian stele of the vultures from the 25th century BC, where soldiers seem to advance in close formation with spears and large shields. Ancient Egyptian armies also employed dense infantry formations with similar principles. However, it was in ancient Greece that the phalanx reached its most recognizable and highly developed form. Greek writers use the term more broadly than modern historians do, often applying it to any massed infantry formation rather than a specific tactical arrangement. Over time, however, the word became strongly linked with the distinctive combat style of Greek hoplite warfare. The classical Greek phalanx emerged during the Archaic period, likely sometime in the 7th century BC, though historians still debate its exact origins. Some believe it developed gradually from earlier forms of organized infantry combat, while others connect its emergence to technological developments, especially the adoption of the large round shield known as the aspis. This shield was crucial because it allowed soldiers to protect both themselves and the man beside them, making close formation combat far more practical. As Greek city-states developed more organized military systems, the hoplite phalanx became their dominant battlefield formation. At the heart of the phalanx was the hoplite, the heavily armed citizen soldier of ancient Greece. Each hoplite supplied his own equipment, which usually included a long spear called the dory, a short sword as a backup weapon, body armor, helmet, greaves, and the large circular aspis shield. The shield was one of the most important parts of the system. Since it was carried on the left arm, it protected not only the individual soldier, but also partially covered the man standing to his left. This created a defensive chain in which every soldier depended on the discipline and courage of those around him. A phalanx was therefore not simply a formation, it was a structure built on trust, coordination, and mutual survival. In battle, the phalanx usually formed in deep rectangular ranks, often 8 rows deep in classical Greece, though depth could vary depending on tactical needs. The soldiers stood close together with shields overlapping and spears projecting forward. The front several ranks could actively engage the enemy with their spears, while the men behind maintained formation and pressure. Battles between phalanxes usually took place on open, flat ground where maintaining formation was easier. Rough or broken terrain could destroy the cohesion that made the formation effective. When advancing, the phalanx typically moved slowly and steadily in order to preserve its structure. A rushed or disorganized advance could be disastrous because the strength of the formation depended entirely on order. As the two sides approached, the atmosphere would become increasingly intense. Soldiers often sang battle hymns, shouted war cries, and prepared for the moment of collision. Once the formations met, the first phase involved rapid spear thrusting as each side attempted to break the enemy's line. If the battle continued, the struggle could become an intense contest of endurance, discipline, and pressure. Historians have long debated the exact nature of close phalanx combat. One theory suggests that battles eventually turned into a literal pushing contest, where soldiers in the rear physically forced the front ranks forward in an attempt to break the enemy formation. Others argue that this interpretation oversimplifies the realities of ancient combat, suggesting that the fighting relied more on coordinated spearwork, pressure, morale, and formation discipline rather than pure physical shoving. Whatever the exact mechanics, success depended heavily on maintaining formation and preventing panic. Once a line broke, defeat often followed rapidly. The psychological dimension of the phalanx was just as important as its physical structure. Because every soldier relied on those beside him, courage and discipline were essential. Fear could destroy the formation faster than enemy weapons. Greek armies often arranged friends, relatives, or men from the same communities near one another, strengthening social pressure to stand firm. A soldier who fled endangered not only himself but the entire line. This social and emotional cohesion helped explain why hoplite warfare could be both incredibly disciplined and intensely brutal. Despite its strengths, the classical Greek phalanx had serious weaknesses. It was powerful from the front but vulnerable on the flanks and rear. Because the formation depended on close coordination, difficult terrain could easily disrupt it. Light infantry, missile troops, and cavalry could also exploit its rigidity if properly used. The Battle of Lyceum famously demonstrated how vulnerable even elite Spartan hoplites could be against more mobile light troops. The phalanx evolved dramatically under Macedonian leadership. Philip II of Macedon transformed the traditional Greek model into a more professional and specialized fighting system. His soldiers, known as phalangites, carried the sarissa, a much longer pike that could extend several ranks beyond the front line. Because the sarissa required two hands to use effectively, Macedonian soldiers carried smaller shields. This created a formation even more formidable from the front than the traditional hoplite phalanx. Under Alexander the Great, this new Macedonian phalanx became one of history's most feared military systems. However, Alexander's success did not rely on the phalanx alone. He used combined arms tactics, integrating cavalry, skirmishers, and other supporting troops alongside the phalanx. The phalanx pinned the enemy in place, while cavalry delivered decisive attacks against vulnerable flanks. This flexibility made Alexander's armies extraordinarily effective. Yet, after his death, many successor kingdoms increasingly relied on phalanx-heavy armies without the same tactical balance, making them more predictable and vulnerable. Eventually, the Roman legion proved superior to traditional phalanx systems in many situations. Unlike the rigid phalanx, the Roman manipular and later cohort systems offered greater flexibility, especially on uneven terrain and in fluid combat situations. Battles such as Cynocephaly and Pydna demonstrated how Roman adaptability could defeat even strong Macedonian phalanxes, particularly when terrain disrupted formation cohesion or exposed vulnerable flanks. Even after its military dominance ended, the legacy of the phalanx remained powerful. Variations of close infantry formations continued in later eras, and the idea of disciplined soldiers advancing as a unified mass survived in many military traditions. The phalanx remains one of the clearest symbols of ancient warfare, a formation where individual survival depended entirely on collective discipline, courage, and unity.